I was carrying a parcel of boots when it happened, and I have never been able to think about that day without thinking about boots. 6 pairs, black, resoled, wrapped in brown paper and string, balanced against my hip. My master's hand-lettered tag on each, Household Regiment Gate Section, returned. I was 19 years old, an apprentice at Renn and Ludd bootmakers, 3 streets down from the lantern gate of the palace, and I had made that delivery walk 200 times. I knew the cobbles by the way they punished my ankles. I knew that at noon the crowd at the gate would be 4 deep, and I would have to go the long way round, past the flower stalls, past the man who sold roasted nuts out of a copper drum, to reach the side door where a corporal would sign my book and give me nothing, not even a nod, because that was the way of them. I never got to the side door. What I got instead was a gap in the crowd, an accident of shoulders, and through that gap I saw a man in a pale gray coat step up onto the low stone plinth beside the sentry box and kick a royal guard in the face. It was not a shove. It was not a slap or a dare or a fool's hand darting out to knock a bearskin sideways. It was a fighter's kick, thrown from the hip with the whole weight of a heavy man behind it, the heel turning over at the last instant, and it took Guardsman Osric Vail across the jaw as he came to the halt at the end of his beat. I heard it. That is the part I could never explain to anyone afterwards, not to the wardens, not to the advocates, not to my own mother. Over the noise of 200 people and the nutseller's bell and a horse somewhere on the gravel, I heard the sound of that boot meeting a man's face, and it was a flat, wrong, wooden sound, like a shutter slammed in an empty house. The bearskin came off. It went spinning, black and absurd, and landed on the cobbles 2 yards from the guard's own boots and rolled a half-turn and stopped. And Guardsman Vail did not fall. I want to be precise here, because a great deal of the realm has since decided it knows what happened in the next 4 seconds, and almost none of the realm was standing where I was standing. He did not fall. He rocked, that is honest, he rocked. His head went back and to the left and his shoulders followed at a hand's width and then came back, and I saw his boots move once, a small grinding shift as he took the weight, the way a man does when a beam is lowered onto him. Then he was upright again. His rifle had never left the vertical. His chin came level. His eyes went forward over the crowd, over the man on the plinth, at nothing, at the far side of the street where there was nothing at all to see. There was blood at the corner of his mouth, not much. A dark seam that gathered and slid and stopped at his jaw. He did not wipe it. He did not lift a hand to his face. He did not look down at his own bearskin lying in the road like a shot bird. He stood. The man in the gray coat had come down off the plinth in a light little landing, arms wide, the way a performer does, and he was laughing. And behind him 3 or 4 men were laughing with him, and one of them had a camera up on a rig, a proper one, black and heavy with a padded handle, and it was pointed at the guard's ruined mouth. "There," the man in the gray coat said loud so that it carried. "There it is. Nothing, nothing, I told you. They can't touch you." He turned to the crowd with his arms still open, inviting us in, and I remember his face better than I remember my own that year. A big handsome slab of a face, cropped fair hair, a nose that had been broken once and set badly and made him look, he must have thought, dangerous. "They're not soldiers, they're furniture. Ask him. Go on, ask him. He's not allowed to say a word." Some people laughed. I want that in the record too, because it is the shame of the thing and I will not leave it out to make us look better than we were. Some people laughed. It had happened so fast that a good part of the crowd had not understood what they had seen. They had seen a man leap up and do something athletic and land grinning, and their faces were still arranged for a spectacle, and had not yet caught up to the fact that a man had been assaulted in front of them. Then the laughing stopped, and it stopped the way a tide goes out, from the front rank backwards, from the people who could see the blood. Because Guardsman Vail did the most astonishing thing I have witnessed in my life. He turned, not toward the man who had kicked him, away from him. He executed his about turn on the mark, exactly as he had 100 times that morning, a crack of leather on stone, and he began to march. 12 paces along the gate. Halt, turn, 12 paces back. His face was already swelling on the left side, closing his eye by degrees, and the blood on his chin had reached his collar and was making a small dark stain on that white, immaculate collar, and he marched. He marched past his own bearskin lying in the road and did not look at it. I have been asked, more times than I can count, what the crowd did next, and people always want me to say that we roared. We did not roar. We went quiet, not the polite quiet of a ceremony, but a bad, sick quiet, the quiet of 200 people all understanding the same thing in the same second, that we had just watched something that should not be possible, and that it had happened because we were there to watch it. The man in the gray coat had not kicked a guard. He had kicked a guard in front of us. We were the point. A woman near me put her hand over her mouth. A man in a workman's cap said, quite clearly, "He's bleeding," in the tone of someone reporting a fact to a room that had lost the ability to see. And the second guard broke. His name was Tobin Reeve, and he was 22, and he was posted at the far box, and I watched him come off his mark. It was a small thing. He came a half pace forward, and his rifle came off the vertical, and his head turned, and his whole young face was open and murderous. And if he had taken 2 more steps, the story of that day would be a different story, and I would be telling it about a different man. Guardsman Vail halted at the end of his beat, and turned, and for perhaps a second and a half he was facing down the line of the gate toward Reeve. He did not speak. He could not. There were things he was permitted to say, and that was not one of them. But something went from him to that boy. I saw it happen, and I could not tell you what it was made of. A stillness passed down the line the way a current passes down a wire. Reeve's rifle came back to the vertical. His foot came back to his mark. His chin came up and his eyes went forward, and there were tears standing in them, and he did not move again. And afterwards, when the whole realm was shouting at each other about what those men are and are not allowed to do, I would think about that the most dangerous moment of the entire affair was not the kick. It was the second and a half afterwards, when one young man wanted to answer it, and another man, bleeding, half blind, his hat in the road, held an entire line of soldiers still with nothing but the way he stood. Then the drill came. It came the way weather comes, and it was over so quickly that the man in the gray coat was still talking when it reached him. I heard a whistle from inside the gate, 2 short blasts, and the small door in the great door banged open, and a color sergeant came through it at a run with 4 guardsmen behind him and 2 of the palace wardens behind them. The wardens are not soldiers. They are the civil constabulary of the precinct, and it matters, as we would all learn, that it was wardens and not soldiers who put hands on him. The color sergeant did not go to the man in the gray coat. He went to Vail and stopped in front of him and looked at his face for about 2 seconds and said something short, and Vail said something shorter, and then the color sergeant stepped aside and let him go on marching. That is what shocked us. I have thought about it for years, and I am certain of it now. It was not the arrest. It was that the man was allowed to go on marching, and that he wanted to, and that not one of his officers thought to stop him. The wardens took the man in the gray coat off the plinth. He did not fight them, and this too was part of his performance, because he put his hands up and turned his palms out and let them fold his arms behind him with the mild, interested air of a customer being measured for a suit. He was laughing again by the time they had him. "This is on camera," he told them, delighted. "This is all on camera. You understand what you've got here. You've got nothing. He touched me first, did you see? He came at me. It's on the camera." "Name," said the warden. A stout, unhurried woman with gray in her hair whose name I would come to know, Warden Sergeant Dunmore. "Deverel Sarn," he said, in the voice of a man giving a gift. And the men with the cameras had already begun to move backwards through the crowd, and one of them, I saw this, I have sworn to it in 3 separate rooms. One of them was not moving backwards. She was standing very still with the big rig on her shoulder and her eye at the cup and the red light burning, and she was filming the guard. not the arrest, and her face was the whitest face in that street. They put Deverel Sarn in a warden's vehicle and took him around the corner and out of our lives for about 6 hours. 2 of the guardsmen were picking up the bearskin. One of them, I remember his hands, big, careful, brushed the grit from it with his glove and turned it and looked at the crown of it where the boot had caught, and I have never forgotten his expression. It was not anger. It was something closer to grief, the way you look at a thing that has been done to something that could not consent. Vail marched his beat until the relief came 11 minutes later, bareheaded, bleeding, 12 paces, halt, turn. Nobody in that crowd left. 200 people stood on cobbles in the wind and watched a man walk up and down for 11 minutes, and I do not think one of us drew a full breath. Somebody at the back started to clap and was hushed so fiercely by 4 strangers that he never tried again. This was not a thing to clap at. We all knew it and none of us could have said why. When the relief marched out and took the post, Vail turned and marched in through the small door in the great door, still without his bearskin, still without a hand near his face, and the door closed behind him, and that was the last the public saw of Guardsman Osric Vail for 11 weeks. I went home with 6 pairs of boots I had not delivered. My master, Lud, old, deaf on one side, hands like tree roots, took one look at me in the doorway and sat me down on the fitting stool and made me tell it twice. When I had finished the second telling, he was quiet for a while, working a knife along a welt, and then he said, "They'll say he swung." "Nobody swung," I said. "Master Lud, he never even lifted his hand. There were 200 of us." Everybody saw. Lud held the boot up to the window and squinted along the line of it. He had been a soldier once, in the Fen levies, a long time before the war we don't discuss. "Boy," he said, 200 people saw it, and there'll be 400 stories by supper. That's not how you win a thing like this." I asked him then, "How you did win a thing like this?" He put the boot down. "You don't," he said. "Not usually, not against a man with money and a camera, that's why they do it." By 9 that evening, the clip was everywhere. It was 31 seconds long. It began with Deverel Sarn's face, grinning at his own lens, saying, "Watch this, watch how he starts it." It cut. It showed the guard's boots on the cobbles, and then a fast, jerking half-second of movement badly framed, in which a rifle butt appeared to come up and a shape in a gray coat appeared to rock backwards. It cut again, and then it showed Sarn on the ground on one knee with his hand to his ribs and the guard standing over him, and a voice, Sarn's voice, breathless, wounded, magnificent, saying, "He hit me. In front of my kids. He hit me." The kick was not in it. It was gone, cut out of the middle of the world as cleanly as you cut a strap. 31 seconds, and by midnight it had been seen 1,000,000 times. And by the following evening, it had been seen by more people than have ever stood in front of the lantern gate since the gate was hung, and every single one of them believed that they had watched a royal guard assault an unarmed man. I sat in the back of the shop with Lud's little screen propped on a last, and I watched that 31 seconds 9 times, and on the 9th time I understood that I was not going to sleep, that night or for a long time after. I had seen the truth with my own eyes from 12 feet away. And the truth, I was learning, does not come with a camera crew. Here is what the realm knew about Deverel Sarn before that noon, and what it took us all far too long to learn afterwards. He owned 3 fight halls in the river quarter and a promotion company that put on prize bouts under colored lights, and he had been, 20 years earlier, a genuinely gifted competitor, a kicker, a heavy-legged, fast, cruel kicker who had been stripped of a regional belt for a foul that the judges called deliberate and he called instinct. He had turned that into a career. He sold the foul. He had built a whole small kingdom on the idea that he was the man who did the thing other men only thought about, and he filmed it, and he sold the filming. His speciality in the last few years had been what he called tests. He would find a man whose work required him to stand still and be silent, a night porter, a doorman, a museum warder, a temple attendant, and he would humiliate him on camera and film the man swallowing it, and then he would turn to the lens and explain what he had proved about the world. That such men were cowards, that the rules that bound them were a kind of leash and only fools wore one, that he, Deverel Sarn, wore nothing. The royal guard was the summit of that mountain. Everyone in the realm knows what those men are for and what they may not do. A guardsman on a public post may challenge, he may present, he may in the last extremity act to defend the ground and the people on it. What he may not do, ever, under any provocation, is answer an insult. It is the oldest and most jealously kept rule of the household regiment, and it is the whole reason the regiment means anything at all. Sarn had understood that rule perfectly. He had understood it better than most of the people who admired the guards, because he had looked at it the way a thief looks at a lock. He had not gone to the lantern gate to make a joke. He had gone there because a man who is forbidden to hit back is, to a certain kind of mind, the most tempting thing in the world. Guardsman Osric Vail was 34 years old. He was a fen country man, from the flat, wet parishes out past the causeway where the fields are cut with black water and the churches lean, and he had 2 sisters and a mother who kept bees. And before the household regiment took him, he had been, I did not learn this for weeks, and when I learned it, it changed the shape of everything, a fairground fighter. Not a prize fighter, nothing so respectable. A fen-fair brawler, the kind who stands on a plank stage in a canvas booth and takes coin to let farm boys try him, and who hurts them, and who is hurt. He had done it from 15 to 19. He had been extremely good at it. In his last year, he had put a man on the ground so hard that the man did not get up for a day and a half. And Osric Vail had walked out of that booth, and off that fairground, and had never in his life taken money to hit anybody again. He enlisted 11 weeks later. He told the recruiting sergeant he wanted a trade that would make his hands useless. You may ask how a bootmaker's apprentice came to know a thing like that about a guardsman. It is because a bootmaker knows everybody's feet, and a man will tell you things standing in his socks that he would not tell his own priest. I had been carrying repairs to the gate section since I was 15. I knew Corporal Ennis had a bad left arch. I knew that the color sergeant, Brannock, wore a half-size larger on the right and would not admit it. And I knew Vail because of the way he treated his boots, better than his own face, better than any man in the section, no scuff, no cracked welt. And once, when he was still a lance corporal, he had come to the shop himself on his own time and stood at the counter and asked Ludd to teach him how the stitch was set. And Ludd, who despised the world, had come out from behind the bench and shown him, and afterwards had said to me, with a shrug, "That one wants to know how things are held together." 3 days after the kick, I went back to the gate with the same 6 pairs of boots. The crowd was different, it was bigger, and it was wrong. There were people there with nothing to do but be there, and a knot of Sarn's men at the corner with a banner, and someone had chalked a word on the plinth that the wardens were scrubbing off with a stiff brush and a bucket. Guardsman Tobin Reeve was on the near post with a stranger beside him, and his face had aged 5 years. Every third person had a lens up. They were waiting for it to happen again. That was the truth of that crowd. They had discovered that the gate was a place where something might be done to a man who could not answer, and they had come to see whether it would be. Color Sergeant Brannock met me at the side door and did not sign my book. He took the parcel and set it on the step and stood with his hands behind him, an enormous gray-faced man with a jaw like a spade. "You were there," he said. "It was not a question." 12 feet, I said. "Then you'll be hearing from the wardens." He looked out past me at the crowd and the banner and the chalk. "Say what you saw, nothing else. Not what you thought, not what it meant. What you saw." I asked how Vail was. I had been carrying the question for 3 days like something hot. Brannock's jaw worked. "He stood down," he said. I did not understand. I said so. "Pending the inquiry," he said. He's been taken off public duty and confined to the depot, and he is not to speak to any person about the matter, including you, including me, including his mother. He said it in the flat voice men use when they are keeping something enormous behind a very small door. That's the form. There's an allegation of assault by a soldier on a civilian. Until it's disposed of, he stood down and he's silent. But he didn't, I began. I know what he didn't do, boy. I was through that door in 9 seconds. Brannick's hands came out from behind his back, and I saw that he had made fists of them, and I saw him notice it and put them away again. It doesn't signify what I know. There is a picture of one of my guardsmen standing over a man on his knees, and it has been seen by half the world, and the regiment cannot say a word in its own defense, because the moment we do, we're a party to it and not a service. So we stand down. And we're silent. And we wait for the law. He looked at me then, and I was 19 and had never had a man like that look at me as if I were of consequence. And the law, he said, is very slow and Deverel Sarn is very fast. The law was slow and Deverel Sarn was very fast. Within the week he had done 3 things, each of them clever, and I have to be honest and say that at the time none of us understood how clever. The first, he was released on bond the same evening, and he walked out to a crowd of his own making, with his ribs strapped. And he stood on the steps of the Warden House and made a short speech about a working man who had been beaten by a soldier of the Crown for the crime of standing where he was told not to, and he wept, and he was very good at weeping. The second, he brought a suit, not a small one. He sued the household regiment and through it the Crown for assault, for injury, for the destruction of his livelihood, and he named Guardsman Osric Vail personally, so that Vail's name, a name no member of the public had ever heard, because that is the point of the uniform, was printed everywhere, over and over, next to the word brutality. And the third, which was the cleverest, he did not go away. He came back to the Lantern Gate. He came back on the 9th day, at noon, with his men and his cameras, and he stood at the edge of the permitted ground with his ribs strapped and his coat open, and he did not touch anybody. He simply stood there, 6 feet from the sentry, and talked to the lens for 40 minutes about fear, and about how these men were props, and about how any citizen could walk up and see for himself that there was nothing behind the fur hat but a boy in a costume. And every so often he would turn and look at young Tobin Reeve and smile at him. And every day for 11 days he came back and did that. He never laid a finger on anyone. He never crossed the line. He had learned exactly where the line was, and he stood on it with his toes over the edge, and he taunted a 19-year-old on a public post for 40 minutes a day while a nation watched, and there was not a single thing the law could do about it, and he knew that, and the knowing was written all over him. I watched it happen twice from the flower stalls with my heart going like a hammer. On the second occasion Sarn's man with the rig came and stood so close to Reeve's face that the lens was a hand's breadth from the boy's eye, and Sarn called out in a fond, coaxing, patient voice as if to a dog, "Go on, son, give us one little one, you'd feel so much better." Reeve stared through him at nothing, and his throat moved once and he held. It is the only time in my life I have understood properly what discipline costs, not what it is, what it costs. It is not a stone thing. It is a man being torn apart from the inside and standing so still that you cannot see it happening. The realm argued. That is the shameful middle of this story, and I will not skip it, because the middle is where most of us were wrong. For 3 weeks the realm did what realms do. It took sides on a subject it knew nothing about. There were people who said the guard had struck first, and there were people who said he had not, and both sides said it very loudly, and the 31-second clip was played and replayed until it stopped being a piece of evidence and became simply the way the thing had happened. There were serious people, thoughtful people, who wrote long and careful pieces about the militarization of ceremonial posts, and asked whether a man with a rifle should be permitted to stand within reach of unarmed citizens. There were men in taverns who said the guards had grown arrogant, that they had been strutting about that forecourt for 100 years, and it would do them good to be reminded who paid for the fur on their heads. And there were, everywhere, in every street and every shop and every queue, the ones who said the thing that I still cannot forgive. They said, well, it's only a job, isn't it? If he didn't want to be kicked, he shouldn't have stood there. The wardens came for my statement on the 5th day. Warden Sergeant Dunmore sat on the fitting stool in the front of the shop with her hat on her knee and wrote in a small book while I talked, and she made me say the thing about the rifle 4 separate times. It never came off the vertical, I said the 4th time. It never moved. His hands never moved. He took it on the face and he went on with his beat. You're certain? I've watched him march that gait since I was 15. I know how the rifle sits. She wrote. Then she closed the book and looked at me for a while with gray, unhurried eyes, and she said, Master Renn, I have taken 41 statements. 38 of them say what you have just said. I felt something loosen in my chest. Then it's finished. No, she said. 38. 38 people who stood in a crowd at a distance at an angle, with heads in front of them, and who all saw a thing that took 2.5 seconds, and who have every one of them spent the last 5 days watching a piece of film that tells them what they saw. She said it gently, and it was one of the coldest things I have ever heard. An advocate will have 38 people to work with, boy, and he will only need to break 3 or 4 of them to make the rest look like a chorus. Memory is soft. Film is hard. That is why he brought a camera and not a witness. Then the gate camera, I said. There's a camera on the gate. There's a camera on everything. Dunmore put her hat on. There was, she said. I have gone over that fact 100 times, and I have never been able to make it into a conspiracy, which is what everybody wanted it to be. The palace precinct cameras were being replaced that season, the whole run of them, gate by gate, an ordinary contract signed a year earlier by an ordinary clerk. The lantern gate had been done in the 2nd week of the works. The new units were mounted and wired and would come into service on the 1st of the month. For 11 days, between the old and the new, the lantern gate of the Palace of Eldermore watched over its ground with 2 beautiful new lenses that were not recording anything at all. Deverel Sarn kicked Guardsman Osric Vail in the face on the 6th of those 11 days. Nobody could ever prove that he knew. He had a cousin in the trades, and the works had been public, and it would not have taken a genius, and the wardens tried for months and could not put a hand on it, and in the end, the inquiry recorded that the coincidence was unfortunate. Unfortunate. The inquiry sat for 6 weeks in a room in the depot with a green cloth on the table. It was not a court. That is the thing I could not get into my head at the time, and it is the thing that nearly cost Osric Vail his name and his life's work. It was a service inquiry, the regiment examining itself, to decide whether one of its own had acted improperly, and to decide, therefore, whether he should stay in uniform. It was not concerned with Deverel Sarn at all. Sarn's criminal matter was elsewhere and moving like a glacier. This room, with its green cloth, was concerned only with the question, did a royal guard strike a member of the public? And it had, to answer that question, 38 statements from a crowd, and 31 seconds of film that said he did. I gave my evidence on a Tuesday. There were 3 officers behind the green cloth and a woman advocate for the regiment and a very young man taking a record, and I stood on a piece of matting and told them about the boots and the gap in the shoulders and the sound of the shutter slamming, and I was doing well until the last man on the left, a major with a kind face, said, Master Renn, you have watched the film of this incident. Yes, sir. How many times? I said honestly that I did not know, 40, 50. He wrote that down, and I felt the floor of my testimony go soft under me, and I understood, standing there on that piece of matting, what Dunmore had been trying to tell me on the fitting stool, that every single time I had watched that 31 seconds trying to prove it was a lie, I had been sanding away my own credibility, and so had 38 other people, and that the man who had cut the film had known we would. Vail was in that room. I had not seen him for 6 weeks. He sat at the side, in plain uniform with his hands on his knees. The swelling was gone. There was a mark still on the left cheekbone, a shadow, a place where the color was wrong, and a white line through the outer edge of his eyebrow where the boot had split it. He watched me the whole time I was speaking, and he did not once change his expression. And when I was finished and was being shown out, he inclined his head to me, perhaps half an inch, and that was all, and I got out into the corridor and had to stand with my hand flat on the cold wall for a full minute. He was not permitted to give evidence in his own cause until the inquiry called him, and when it did, I heard this later from Brannock, it lasted 11 minutes. They asked him whether he had struck Deverel Sarn. He said no. They asked him whether he had at any point raised his weapon toward Deverel Sarn. He said no. They asked him why, if he had been assaulted as he claimed, he had not called for assistance, had not challenged, had not stopped his beat. And Osric Vail said, "The post was not in danger, sir, I was." They asked him to explain the distinction. And he said, "Brannock told me this twice, both times looking at the floor, the post is what I am there for, I am not." That was the whole of his defense. He gave them nothing else. No account of his face, no plea, no anger. 6 weeks of his name in every mouth in the realm as a brute and a bully, and the man stood in front of 3 officers and told them, in effect, that the only thing that had been damaged was a man of no importance, and therefore the inquiry could be brief. And the inquiry, being a decent body of decent men with nothing but statements and a doctored film, began slowly, reluctantly, with a heavy heart, in the way that decent institutions destroy people, to move toward the only finding it could reach. Not guilty, that was never in it. There was not evidence to say he had struck anybody. What it moved toward was worse. No finding. Insufficient evidence to determine the events, which meant no vindication, no statement, no restoration. It meant that Guardsman Osric Vail would be quietly, kindly, honorably discharged from the household regiment in the interests of the service, with his conduct unresolved forever, and the 31 seconds standing as the only record the world would ever have of him. Sarn's advocate, a smooth man named Kelrick Doone, told the newspapers that his client would be content with that. Content. He said his client had never wished to see a soldier punished, only to see the truth acknowledged. And on the 9th of the 11 days of Sarn's daily performance at the gate, a black motorcar came down the palace approach at speed, and did not stop where such cars stop, and Princess Adela got out of it in the middle of the road. I was there. I had come with boots I did not need to deliver. Half the quarter was there by then. It had become a sort of horrible fixture, the noon show at the Lantern Gate. She was in plain dark clothes. No ceremony, no escort but a single equerry who had to run to keep up with her. She was 50-odd, the king's sister, and she had been colonel-in-chief of the household regiment for 19 years, which most people take to be a decoration, and which she had never once treated as one. She walked straight past the wardens, straight past the barrier, and she stopped in front of Deverel Sarn on his line, and Sarn's man swung the rig onto her with the joy of a man whose luck has come in. She did not look at the camera. "You are standing on the ground of my regiment," she said, "and you may stand there. It is a public street. I have come to look at you." And she looked at him. I will attempt to describe it, and I will fail. She stood at a distance of about 4 feet, with her hands loose at her sides, and she looked at Deverel Sarn's face the way a woman looks at a wall that is cracked, with attention, and with a kind of practical distaste, and without the smallest particle of fear or interest. Sarn began to talk. He was very good at talking, and he had an audience of hundreds and a lens at his shoulder, and he told her, in that warm, reasonable voice, that he was a citizen who had been beaten, that he bore the boy no malice, that he had come only to stand where he had been standing when it happened, and that if her regiment had nothing to hide then. "You kicked him," she said. Sarn's mouth kept moving for a moment after it had run out of words. You came here and you took your position, and you waited for the halt at the end of his beat, when he was stationary and his weapon was at the vertical, and he could not have seen your foot leave the ground, and you kicked a standing man in the face for an audience, said Princess Adela. 14 people have described your run-up to me. You do not have a run-up when you are startled. You have a run-up when you have measured the distance. Madam, with respect. You will not say that word to me, she said without heat. You do not know it. And then she turned her back on him, and on his camera, and on his men, and on the hundreds of people who had come to enjoy it. And she walked to the sentry box and stood in front of Guardsman Reeve, who was rigid and white, and 22 years old, and who had endured 9 days of that man's voice a yard from his ear. She said something to him that nobody heard. Then she stepped back and she saluted him. The colonel-in-chief of the household regiment, the king's own sister, stood on the cobbles of the lantern gate in front of 1,000 strangers and saluted a private soldier on a public post. That was the moment the wind changed. Not the trial, not the film, not the verdict, that. I have talked to 50 people who were in that street, and every one of them says the same. Something went through the crowd like cold water, and afterwards, when Deverel Sarn tried to start talking again, a man behind me, a stranger, a laborer with plaster on his sleeves, said loudly, "Shut your mouth." And nobody laughed at him. Sarn came back on the 10th day and the 11th, and the crowd had turned, and it was not fun anymore, and on the 12th day he did not come. But a princess's contempt is not evidence, and a crowd's disgust is not a verdict, and the inquiry with the green cloth went on toward its kind, decent, ruinous finding, and there were 9 days left before it would deliver it. She came to the depot the same evening. I know what was said in that room because Brannock, who was in it, told me years later, on a night when he had cause to be honest. She had the inquiry's draft in her hand. "You mean to lose him," she said. The senior officer, a general, a good man, a tired man, told her that the inquiry had no evidence, that a finding could not be manufactured, that the discharge would be honorable and the pension full, and the service would look after him. "Look after him," she repeated. "Ma'am, there is no film." "Then find some," said Princess Adela. "There is no camera on the—" "There were," she said, "by the warden's own count, somewhere between 600 and 800 people standing on that ground at noon on that day, in this realm, in this year." She put the draft down on the table. "And what does every single one of them carry in their pocket?" There was a silence in the room of a length that Brannock remembered for the rest of his life. "They will not come forward," the general said at last. "Not against him. He has money and he has advocates, and half of them have already told the wardens they'd rather not be involved." "Then we will not ask them to come forward," said the colonel-in-chief. "We will ask them for the film and nothing else. No names in the papers. No stand, no cross-examination, no advocate of Mr. Doone's picking anybody's memory to pieces for 3 hours. Just the pictures. The pictures do not get frightened." And so, on the last day of that month, the wardens of the palace precinct published a notice, and it was the strangest notice I have ever read in my life, and it was pinned up in every shop window and every tram and every tavern in the quarter, and it said, in effect, "Were you at the Lantern Gate at noon on the 6th? If you filmed any part of it, any part, any angle, any length, however poor, bring it." And underneath, the address where it was to be brought. Which, because the warden house had one small door and no room, and because Warden Sergeant Dunmore had a practical mind and knew the quarter, was not the warden house at all. It was a bootmaker's shop 3 streets from the gate. We cleared the front bench and laid a plank across 2 lasts and covered it with sacking, and that was the table. Ludd put a lamp over it. Dunmore sent a warden clerk with a ledger and a locked tin box and a stack of paper envelopes, and at 8 in the morning on the first day we opened the door. Nobody came for 2 hours. Then a woman came in with a phone in her hand and her jaw set, and said, "I was by the nut cellar," and would not sit down, and stood with her back very straight while the clerk copied her file across and wrote her a receipt, and left without saying anything else. By noon there were 11 people in the shop. By the second day there was a queue down Cordwainer Lane, and it stayed there for 9 days. I will not pretend it was a tide of righteousness. Half of them came because they wanted to be part of something. Some came to argue. 2 men came to tell us the guard had swung and were shown their own footage on the clerk's screen and went away without a word. One old woman brought a device so ancient that Ludd had to send for a boy from the telegraph office to get anything off it at all. And what came off it was 14 seconds of the sky and a very clear recording of the sound, that flat wooden sound, and then 200 people not breathing. And the clerk sat and listened to it 4 times, and then wrote in her ledger with a hand that was not steady. What I remember is the faces. They were ashamed. Almost every one of them, coming through my master's door with a phone held out in front of them like something they had found and could not keep, was ashamed, because they had stood there and filmed it. That was what we had all done. 600 people watched a man get kicked in the face, and not one of us went over the barrier, and not one of us shouted, and every single one of us reached for a lens. Warden Sergeant Dunmore came on the 4th evening and looked at the tin box, which by then had to be emptied twice a day. 206, said the clerk. Dunmore did not look pleased. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic she did not enjoy. How many show the strike? The clerk turned pages, clean. With the strike in frame, unobstructed from the beginning of the run-up. Yes. The clerk said none. I did not understand it then, and it took a fortnight and a very unpleasant afternoon in a courtroom to make me understand it. 206 recordings. Some of them started too late. Some of them were pointed at the bearskin. Dozens were behind a rank of shoulders, or a flag, or the nut seller's copper drum, or the horse. A great many caught the aftermath, Vail standing, the blood, the marching, the arrest, and those were terrible and moving and worth a great deal, and every advocate in the realm would tell you they proved nothing about who had struck whom, because they began after it. And the 20 or so recordings that were pointed straight at Guardsman Osric Vail at the critical instant had all been made by people standing in a crowd, and a crowd moves, and every one of them jerked, or was jostled or panned, at exactly the moment they mattered. Doone, Sarn's advocate, had the whole 206 put before the inquiry in a single afternoon, and he stood up and thanked the wardens for their diligence, and then took the collection apart with the patience of a man boning a fish. "This one begins," he said, 1 1/5 seconds after the incident. "This one shows a hat. This one shows my client's back. This gentleman was standing behind a horse. This one is charming. This one is 14 seconds of cloud. And this one, sirs, this one at the vital moment does this." He played it. It was a smear of gray and red and a woman's voice saying, "Oh, that is the best of them. That is their best. 206 cameras, and not one of them can tell you what my client says happened, and not one of them can tell you it did not." He let that sit. "There is one recording of this incident in the world," said Kelrick Doone. "That shows the whole of it from a fixed position, in frame, in focus. My client made it. My client has produced it. My client has produced it, sirs, which is a curious thing for a guilty man to do." And the inquiry on the 11th of the month closed its evidence. I went to the depot gate the next morning. I do not know why. I had it in my head that I would ask for him, which was absurd. Nobody asks for a guardsman. But Brannock was at the gate, and he came out to me, and he stood in the road with his cap under his arm. "It's Thursday," he said. "They give it Thursday. And no finding." He said it without any inflection at all. "Discharge in the interests of the service, full pension. They'll write him a letter." I remember I said something like, "But that's not," and could not finish the sentence, and Brannick waited politely for me to find the end of it, and I never did. His mother's poorly, Brannick said after a while. Fen country. He'll go back and keep her bees, I expect. He turned his cap over in his hands. 34 years old, 16 years in, and he'll go home a man that nobody can say did or didn't. He put his cap on. That's the bit Sarn understood, he said. Better than the officers, better than the advocates, better than us. He never needed to win. He only needed to make it so that nobody could ever say. She came into the shop at 5:20 on the Wednesday, the day before the finding. I was alone. Ludd had gone up. The plank was still across the lasts, and the tin box was gone, and the queue was 9 days finished, and the whole thing had the feel of a fairground on a wet Monday. She had a boot in her hand. She was young, 23, 24, with a thin, sharp face and a heavy dark coat, and her hair pushed up under a cap, and she stood just inside the door with the light behind her, and did not come to the counter. And I knew her. It took me 4 seconds, and then my mouth went dry, because I had seen that face exactly once, in the whitest moment of my life, standing very still in a moving crowd with a big rig on her shoulder, and the red light burning while everybody else ran backwards. "I want a heel," she said. "We're closed. I want a heel put on this boot." Her voice was perfectly level, and her hand, holding the boot, was shaking so badly that the laces were moving. I came round the counter. She did not move. Outside, across the lane, there was a motor car with 2 men in it, and they were not looking at the shop, and they were doing that not looking with the enormous concentration of men who have been told to do it. "You're one of his," I said. "I want a heel put on this boot," she said, "and I want a receipt, and I want you to write in your book that I brought it in on Wednesday at 5:20, and that I said nothing else, because they will ask you, and I want you to be able to tell them the truth." She put the boot on the counter. It was a woman's boot, black, worn, good leather badly used, and the heel had been prized off and stuck back on with 2 nails, and it sat crooked. Anybody looking through a window would see a girl bringing a broken boot to a bootmaker. She looked at me for 1 second longer. "They're outside," she said, very quietly without moving her lips much. "They're outside my mother's house too." And then she turned and walked out, and the bell over the door went, and I watched her cross Cordwainer Lane with her hands in her pockets and get into the back of the motor car, and it drove away. I stood there for a long time. Then I took the boot to the bench and put it in the vise and got the pincers and drew the 2 nails and lifted the heel off. There was a cavity cut into it, not made, cut recently, badly, with a small knife, by somebody who had never worked leather in their life and had hacked at it in the dark in a hurry. The wood was raw and pale where the blade had gone. Inside was a memory card in a twist of oilcloth, and a piece of paper folded to the size of a stamp, on which was written in a small hard hand, "Master File, 11.41 to 12.06, not edited. I made the cut. I am sorry. I will say so if you can keep me alive." Her name was Nessa Croy, and she had worked for Deverel Sarn for 4 years. I did not sleep. I sat in the back of the shop with the card on the bench in front of me and did not put it into anything, because I was 19 and terrified, and I had a horror of touching it wrongly and destroying it. At 2 in the morning I woke Ludd, and he came down in his nightshirt and looked at the card and the paper and the boot for a long moment with his terrible old face. "Get the warden," he said. "They'll say I made it. They'll say she made it. It came out of a heel, Master Ludd. It came out of a heel in my shop." "Boy," he put his hand on the back of my neck, which he had never done in 4 years, and it was like being gripped by a root. "Get the warden, now, in the dark, before you've had time to be clever." Dunmore was at the shop in 40 minutes with her coat over her nightclothes and a warden clerk in a locked case, and she did not touch the card either. She photographed it in the heel. She photographed the heel in the vise. She photographed the boot, the counter, my ledger with the entry the girl had told me to make, the 2 nails, the pincers, the twist of oilcloth. She made me write out in my own hand at 4 in the morning at my master's bench exactly what had been said and by whom, and she signed it and the clerk signed it and I signed it. And then she took the card away, and the inquiry sat at 10, and at 3 minutes past 10 Warden Sergeant Dunmore walked into a room with a green cloth on the table and asked the officers of the household regiment for 1 hour. They gave her 6 weeks. The service inquiry adjourned that morning and never resumed, because there was suddenly a criminal matter of a size that swallowed it whole, and because Princess Adela, who had been told at 7 o'clock that morning and who had put the telephone down, and according to her equerry, said one word not fit for this account, went directly to her brother. I do not know what passed between the king and his sister. I know the consequence because the whole realm saw it. 3 days later, the Crown announced that the prosecution of Deverel Sarn would proceed in open court, in the ordinary criminal court of the realm, before an ordinary judge and an ordinary jury, with the public admitted and every seat filled by lot. There were people who advised against it. There always are. There was a view, a sensible, cautious, grown-up view, that the safest course was to conclude the inquiry quietly in Vail's favor, restore him without fanfare, and let the criminal charge be settled by plea in some small courtroom on a wet afternoon, and let the whole miserable business sink. Princess Adela's answer to that was reported to me by 3 separate people who were in the room, and it was the same each time. He did it in front of 600 people, she said. It will be undone in front of 600 people. We are not going to bury this. We are going to try it in the light. The trial of Deverel Sarn opened on a cold, bright morning in the 9th week. The charge was not the one the realm expected. The realm expected assault, and there was an assault charge, and it was the least of them. Crown Advocate Hester Bray, a small, unhurried, terrifying woman with a voice you had to lean forward to hear, laid the whole thing out on the first morning in about 9 minutes, and the shape of it was this: that Deverel Sarn had, with premeditation, assaulted a sentry of the household regiment in the execution of his duty. That he had thereafter caused a recording of the incident to be falsified, in order to lay a criminal act at the door of an innocent man. That he had sworn a statement he knew to be false, and had caused another to swear one. And that he, together with his brother and business partner Garrick Sarn, had threatened a witness, had put men outside a young woman's lodgings and outside her mother's house, to keep the truth of it in the dark. The assault was worth a year or 2. The rest of it in the law of that realm was worth a great deal more, and Bray said so on the first morning, quietly, without any relish at all, and I watched Kelrick Doone's face while she said it, and I knew, even at 19, that Doone had not been told everything by his client. Deverel Sarn gave evidence on the 4th day. He was magnificent. I want to be fair to him because contempt is easy and it is not accurate. He was, for the better part of 3 hours, the most convincing man in that building. He was calm and sorrowful and self-deprecating. He admitted freely that he was a showman and a loudmouth and not a nice man. He said he had been provoked. He said he had been frightened, that he had put a foot up to fend off a rifle butt coming at his head, that it was a reflex from 20 years of fighting and he was not proud of it. He wept once briefly and apologized for weeping. He said he bore Guardsman Vail no ill will and hoped the boy could have his career back. He said, "I've done a lot of stupid things for a camera. I never touched that man in anger." And under Doone's gentle questioning he swore, on the 4th day of his own trial, in a firm, clear voice, 3 things. That he had not planned it. That he had never in his life assaulted any other man on any post. And that his production rig, the big camera, the master unit, the black one with the padded handle, had not been recording that morning. It had been switched to standby, he said, while they set up. The only footage his company possessed was the handheld material, which he had produced to the wardens in full. Hester Bray rose to cross-examine at 11 minutes past 2. She asked him nothing about the kick, not one question. She asked him about his business and his fight hauls and the tests he made for his channel, and she took him through them one at a time: the night porter, the doorman, the museum warder, and Sarn, who had expected an attack and had prepared for an attack, relaxed by degrees into the pleasure of talking about himself, because Bray was interested and polite and had done her reading. Then she said, "The master unit was on standby." "That's right. You are quite certain?" "I'm certain. Because it costs a great deal to run, and you set up carefully, and you don't waste the card." "That's exactly right. So there is no recording from that camera of you and your men on the ground at the Lantern Gate that morning before the incident?" "No. Nothing at all. Nothing at all." Hester Bray looked down at her papers for a moment, and then she said to the judge, "My lord, may we have the screen?" And they played it. It ran for 25 minutes, and it was recorded on a fixed rig from a position about 6 feet to the left of the sentry box, high, on a shoulder, in perfect focus, and it began at 11:41 in the morning, which was 19 minutes before Deverel Sarn kicked a man in the face. You could hear everything. You could hear him setting it up. You could hear him telling his men where to stand and where not to stand. "Not there, you'll be in it, get behind me." And you could hear him being told by one of them that there were wardens on the far side, and you could hear him say comfortably, "They'll do nothing. That's the whole point. Nobody does anything." You could hear him choose. That was the part of it that made a woman in the public gallery stand up and have to be helped out. He walked along the line of the gate with the camera behind him, and he looked at the guardsman the way you look at stock, and he said of Tobin Reeve, "Not the young one, he'll cry. It's not funny if they cry." And then he stopped, and you could hear his breathing change, and he said, "The big one, the one at the end. Look at him, look at that. He's been standing there like that for an hour. He hasn't moved a muscle. He thinks he's a statue." And then, with real pleasure, with genuine warmth, the voice of a man saying something he had been saving up, "That's the one. Watch me open him up." And one of his men said, "Dev, that's a soldier." And Deverel Sarn said, "That's a costume. There's a lad in there and he's not allowed to touch me, and that's the joke. And when he stands there and takes it, 40 million people are going to see exactly what a hero is worth." And then he said, laughing, "Like the doorman, you remember the doorman, he didn't even put his hands up." The courtroom did not make a sound. 19 minutes of it. The measuring of the distance, he paced it twice, casually, as if strolling. The wait for the beat to end, because he had watched 3 of them and he knew that at the end of the beat the sentry halts and stands, and a standing man does not see a foot leave the ground. And then the kick. From 6 feet, in focus, in frame from the beginning of the run-up. And the rifle never moving, and the guard rocking and coming back and standing. And the blood and the bearskin in the road, and the man walking on. And Deverel Sarn's own voice, 22 seconds later, off camera, ringing with a joy that no advocate on earth could have explained away. "Did you get it? Tell me you got it. Tell me you got it. Tell me you got it." They stopped the film there. Hester Bray let the silence stand for as long as she decently could, and then she said, in her quiet voice, "Mr. Sarn, would you like to reconsider your evidence about the master unit?" He said nothing. He had gone the color of a wall. "Mr. Sarn." "That card," he said, "was stolen." "It was," said Bray. "It was stolen from a man who was destroying his own recordings, by a young woman he had told on the evening of the 6th to make a cut and keep her mouth shut, and who did what she was told and has been sick with it every day since. We will come to Miss Croy. She is going to tell this court what she did and what it cost her and what your brother's men said to her mother on her mother's own step. She is not proud of herself, Mr. Sarn. That is the difference between you." She turned a page. "You said on oath that you did not plan it. The court has just heard you plan it. You said on oath that you had never assaulted another man on a post. The court has just heard you laugh about the doorman, and the doorman is outside, Mr. Sarn. He came on his own account and he has been waiting since Tuesday. And you said on oath that there was no film." She looked up at him. "There was always film," said Hester Bray. "You are a man who cannot bear a thing not to be filmed. That is the whole of you, and it is the reason you are going to prison." They called Guardsman Osric Vail on the 6th day. He came in uniform. He was still a serving soldier. The discharge had never been signed, and Brannock told me afterwards that the general had put the papers in a drawer and locked it and given the key to his clerk with instructions to lose it. Vail took the oath and stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes forward, and he answered everything Bray asked him in 6 or 7 words at a time, and the whole room strained to hear him. She took him through it, the beat, the halt, the impact, what he had done and not done, the 11 minutes. Then she said, "Guardsman Vail, why did you not defend yourself?" He did not answer at once. I was in the gallery in the 3rd row, and I could see the side of his face and the white line through his eyebrow where the boot had split it. "I did, ma'am," he said. "You did." "I defended myself," said Osric Vail. "I did not give him the thing he came for." Bray waited. And Vail said, not loudly, not to the gallery, not to the man in the dock. He said it to the front of the room, in the voice of a man giving a report. "He came for my hands, ma'am. He did not get them." Nobody wrote that down properly at first. It went around the realm in about 6 different versions, and none of them were right, and it did not matter, because everybody understood it. And by the end of the year there were men in the Fen country with it burnt into a plank over the door of a public house. Doone rose to cross-examine and asked him 4 questions and sat down. There was nothing in that man to break. He had told the truth from the first minute of the first day, without decoration, to anybody who asked him, and he had gone on telling it while the whole realm called him a brute, and he had never once raised his voice. The last question Doone asked him, and I have always thought it was the only honest thing that advocate did in the whole matter, was this: "Guardsman Vail, do you hate my client?" And Vail thought about it. He actually thought about it. You could see him do it for 3 or 4 seconds in front of everybody. "No, sir," he said. "I know what he is. I was very nearly one." Nessa Croy gave her evidence on the 7th day, and it was the hardest thing in that courtroom. She told them what she had done. She did not soften it, and she did not let Bray soften it for her. She had been in the edit room at 10 o'clock that night with Deverel Sarn standing behind her chair, and he had put his hand on the back of her neck, and he had told her which frames to take out, and she had taken them out. She had made the 31 seconds. She had watched 1,000,000 people believe it. She had signed a sworn statement saying the master unit was on standby, and she had signed it in a room with Garrick Sarn sitting across the table telling her pleasantly that her mother lived alone. And then, 11 days before the finding, she had gone into the archive at 2 in the morning while Sarn's men were burning cards in the yard, and she had taken the one card that mattered, and she had cut a hole in the heel of her own boot with a kitchen knife, and she had walked past 2 men in a motorcar and into a bootmaker's shop and asked for a repair. The judge, Lord Justice Farrant, asked her why she had done it. She said because he went on marching. She said she had been at the cup of the big camera when it happened, and she had kept it on him, and she had watched, through a lens, a man with his face laid open decide not to be the thing that had been done to him. And she said she had gone home that night and edited it out, and she had not been able to look at her own hands since. She was charged. She had to be. She had committed a serious offense, and she never pretended otherwise. She pleaded guilty to it, and the court, having heard everything, gave her a suspended term and not 1 day inside, and Farrant said in giving it that the law does not exist to punish the one person in a conspiracy who found the courage to end it. The jury was out for 4 hours and 40 minutes. They convicted Deverel Sarn on every count: assault on a sentry in the execution of his duty aggravated by premeditation, perverting the course of justice by the falsification of the recording, perjury, witness intimidation, jointly with Guardsman Sarn, who was convicted with him and who wept in the dock, which his brother did not. Vail sentenced him on a Friday afternoon in front of a full court, and he was not a theatrical man, and he did not make a speech, and what he said took 2 minutes. He said that the assault itself, taken alone, would have drawn a short custodial term. He said that what raised it was everything after, that Sarn had chosen his victim precisely because his victim was bound by an honorable rule not to answer, and had then attempted to have that man convicted, dismissed, and disgraced for a crime he had watched him not commit, and had put men outside a young woman's mother's house to make it stick. "You did not merely strike a man who could not strike back," said Lord Justice Vail. "You then tried to take from him the only thing he had left, which was the truth of what he had done. That is the offense. The kick was 6 inches of it." 7 years. Deverel Sarn went out of that dock without looking at anybody, and the crowd outside, and there were thousands. The street was choked from the court steps to the corner, did not jeer him, and did not shout, and did not throw anything. They simply stood there in the cold with their hands at their sides and watched him go past, and not one of them raised a phone. I have thought about that for a long time. I think it was the only apology 600 people could make. His fight halls were sold to pay the costs. His promotion license was struck. The company that had made him rich dissolved within the month, and the men who had stood behind him with the banner at the lantern gate scattered so completely that, when the wardens went looking for 2 of them to answer for the intimidation, they were found working under other names in other towns, and gave evidence against him gladly. And of all the things Deverel Sarn built, only one survived him, and it was not the one he wanted. Because the 25 minutes of his own master file went out to the realm entire, the court released it, and Adela insisted on it, and it was watched more times than the 31 seconds ever had been. And what the realm took from it was not the kick. It was the 11 minutes afterwards. It was a bareheaded man with a ruined face marching 12 paces up and 12 paces back in front of a crowd that had come to laugh at him. Somebody somewhere coined the line, and it was on every wall in the quarter by spring, and it is still on the wall of my own shop in a frame my master made. He moved the cap. He did not move the man. The inquiry with the green cloth reconvened for 1 hour and 11 minutes, and found that Guardsman Osric Vail had at no point struck, threatened, or raised his weapon toward any person, and that his conduct in the incident and in the 11 minutes following it had been in the highest tradition of the household regiment. The discharge papers came out of the general's drawer and were burnt in the grate of the mess in front of the section, which is not, I am told, a regulation procedure. He went back on the gate on a Tuesday in the first week of spring, because he asked to, and because they let him choose the day, and he chose a Tuesday specifically because it was the quietest day of the week and he wanted no fuss. There was fuss. The crowd began at 6 in the morning, and by the changing at 11 the forecourt was fuller than I have ever seen it, before or since, and utterly silent, not out of ceremony, but because nobody had told them what to do and they had all separately decided that noise would be wrong. He marched out with the section. He took the post. He halted and turned and stood, and the white line through his eyebrow was clearly visible, and he looked at nothing at all. And 600 or 700 people stood on those cobbles in the cold, and did not make a sound, and did not lift a single camera. King Alaric came down at midday, unannounced, on foot, with one equerry, which is a thing that does not happen. He did not make a speech, and there was no ceremony, and it lasted perhaps 40 seconds. He walked the length of the gate, and he stopped in front of Guardsman Osric Vail, and Vail presented arms, and the king returned it. And then the king said something to him, quietly, and turned and walked back in through the small door in the great door. Everyone in the realm wanted to know what it was. Vail never told a soul. Brannock never got it out of him, and neither did I, in 20 years of putting boots on that man's feet, and the only answer he would ever give, and he would smile very slightly, which was rare, was, "It was a short thing, and it was for me." That is nearly all of it. Tobin Reeve stayed in the regiment and made color sergeant of his own section, and is a hard man about the drill and softer about most other things, and he still cannot watch the film and won't, and nobody makes him. Warden Sergeant Dunmore retired to the coast and gets a barrel of fen honey every autumn from a beekeeper's son she has never met. Nessa Croy served her days of community work in the quarter, and then, because she had nowhere to go and nobody would employ her and Ludd was old and I could not stitch a welt to save my life, she came to work at Renn and Ludd, bootmakers. She is a better hand than I am. She has never touched a camera again, and she has never once asked me to tell her she did the right thing, and I have never once had to. Osric Vail served 11 more years, made color sergeant, and went home to the fen country when his mother could no longer keep her own bees. He was never promoted for what happened at the gate, and he would have refused it if they had tried. He was promoted in the end for being the man who could hold a line of frightened soldiers still with nothing but the way he stood, which is, if you think about it, exactly the same thing. And I am the master of the shop now, and Ludd is under the yews at St. Cuthbert's. And every second Thursday I still walk a parcel of boots up Cordwainer Lane and round past the flower stalls to the Lantern Gate, where a section of the household regiment stands in the wind and does not move. The tourists come, they always will. They lean in and they mug for their lenses, and they hold their hands an inch from a young man's face to see what he will do, and every so often one of them is not joking, and I stand at the barrier with my parcel under my arm and my heart going, and I watch. And what I want to say to them, and never do, is this. You think the rule is what stops him. You think there is a paper somewhere with his name on it, and that the paper is the only thing between your face and his fist, and that if you could get the paper away, you would find nothing behind it but a boy in a costume. There is no paper. There is a fen country brawler who took money to hurt farm boys in a canvas booth, and who walked out of that booth at 19 and spent the rest of his life learning how to hold still, and who was kicked in the face in front of 600 people, and chose, with his own hands, on his own account, with his blood running into his collar, to go on marching. He came for those hands, and he did not get them. That is not a leash. That is a man.